This is Creepy and Geeky. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today's guest is Hugh McStay. Hugh is a horror writer and critic for the London Horror Society. Welcome to the show, Hugh.
Hi, Robert. Thanks very much for having me on. I'm excited to talk about some of my my more favorite Tarantino movies. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh yeah, thanks for coming on. I was glad to get your response. I threw it out there into the Twitterverse and actually managed to get quite a lot of response to it, which was nice. I think I got everybody within like 24 hours, which was kind of odd. Usually I have a much harder time getting people to come on the show.
I think the thing is you'll find that so many people have a lot to say about Tarantino, so we've been falling over ourselves to get on your show.
Well, that's good. I hope it'll be a good run, and we'll have a lot of listeners.
Yeah, I'm excited to listen to the other shows to hear what other people think of the movie. So yeah, I'm quite excited.
Yeah. I've had some good conversations already so far.
Excellent.
I'm sure this will be another one. So on today's episode, we are talking about Inglourious Basterds and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, two of his later revisionist history movies. Which was funny too, because when I originally paired them together, it was mostly because they were revisionist histories. But it wasn't until I started watching them that they both star Brad Pitt. I didn't even. That's the funny thing, was I wasn't even thinking about that connection when I did it. But it's a great connection. And it's the only two he's done with Brad Pitt. So.
That's interesting, because when you suggested those two films together, in my head it was that same thing. It's like, it's the revisionist history element that links them. But having rewatched them, it's interesting to see how many themes and things overlap with each other.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's there's quite a lot that overlaps. Interestingly enough, there's you get a little World War II movie making in the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Rick Dalton's movie, The 14 Fists of McCluskey.
Yeah. And all I could think when I was watching Once Upon a Time last night was how much I want to watch The 14 Fists of McCluskey. That looks like a tremendous film.
It looked like fun, man.
Yeah. That's
just
a great way to spend
design
the
for
night.
that scene alone was like perfect.
Yeah, no, it just looks terrific. I mean, watching Al Pacino watch that film is a lot of fun as well. I'd quite like to be in that viewing room with him to see what he thought of it. But yeah, no, there's a richness to the filmmaking in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that is absolutely glorious. And like I said, I'm looking forward to kind of digging into that side of things.
Oh, definitely. Let's go ahead and start. We're gonna go ahead and start with Inglourious Basterds, which is an interesting movie. I think it's the first time, like, let's see, I'm trying to place it in the filmography because it comes right after Death Proof. And so up until that point, he'd been doing a lot more, I would think, more exploitation, grindhouse style movies up until that point. And Inglourious Basterds, yes, it's definitely in that exploitation zone. It's definitely a takeoff on a lot of the war movies of the 60s. And you definitely get that feeling, but it's definitely feels like the beginning of his more mature stage. This point from Inglourious Basterds on, you get a much more, I think, mature filmmaker in lots of ways that you see it building in the earlier movies, but Inglourious Basterds seems to be the tipping point, the moment that he becomes, in my mind, a much better, much richer filmmaker.
Yeah, do you know, I don't think I disagree with much of that. What I think with Inglorious is I mean, first of all, the first time you watch it, it's such a lot of fun because you don't know the fact that it's a revisionist history film.
Yeah.
So, you know, before you get to that big moment towards the end, you really, you know, you're really not sure how it's going to all pan out, but you do have some certainties in the back of your head, which obviously turn out to be blindingly wrong because he's completely wrong-footing you. But I think the film. My issue with the film is it's a little bit too segmented now. Obviously, I know he purposefully breaks it up into chapters, but there is an element that the individual parts are maybe greater than the whole.
Yeah.
I think Inglorious has some of Tarantino's finest work. I would point to the opening scene with Christoph Waltz, and I would point to the bunker scene about maybe halfway through the film in the bar. Two genuinely like spellbinding, heart-stopping scenes of pure tension and actors on the top of their game.
Oh, yeah.
But they jump out at you, and the other things that you kind of take away from the film, or at least what I took away from the film. Whereas I feel that the overall movie together is a little bit choppy. But
yeah.
I think the strength of some of the individual scenes and some of the performances are magnificent, and that I think it really helps hold things together.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. You can feel that there's it like throughout the movie. There's tonally, there's a lot of it kind of varies wildly. I mean, like you said, you get the beginning sequence with Christopher Waltz, and then the bar scene. Those are super high tension scenes, and then you get stuff like the basically the end act, which while tension filled has a lot more comedy to it.
Yeah.
And it definitely is kind of an up and down. You're kind of like, okay, where's he going with all of this? Which is great because I mean, there is a nice balancing act that he's doing there, but it can make you feel unbalanced a lot as a viewer. But the performances still stand out so well that it's so good.
Yeah, I mean, look, almost every single role in this film feels perfectly pitched and perfectly cast. Brad Pitt is genuinely spectacular as Aldo Rain. I assume, I mean, I read that Tarantino had been working on the script for that for about a decade. And I can only imagine as we was waiting for an actor who could really embody the role of Aldo Rain the way that Brad Pitt does, with that absurd Texan accent, which is just so bizarre and wonderful, and I don't think the pronunciation of the word "buongiorno" gets quite enough love because when I heard that the other night when I was watching the movie, I must have been for about 5 minutes. I had to pause the movie to compose myself with the "buongiorno." It just cracks me up. But yeah, you look down the entire cast, you know, like Diane Kruger as Bridget von Hammersmark and Melanie Laurent as Shosanna. I mean, or even Fassbender, who's, you know, he gets a relatively small role in this, but my goodness, does he make such an impact with the small amount of screen time that he has. It's impeccably cast. Everyone seems to be bringing their A game, and everyone just seems to be doing something interesting with the role they've given, no matter how big or small.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. You know, that's what I love about it. It's got a huge expansive cast with great people, like you said, Brad Pitt, Diane Kruger, Michael Fassbender, Christoph Waltz, man. It's like Christoph Waltz is like, see, and prior to this movie, I'd never experienced anything with Christoph Waltz before, so I had no clue who he was. And he was a revelation, and so much so he got an Oscar award for it. So
it's fascinating. I mean, obviously he got his Oscar for this, and then he gets his next Oscar for Django
Unchained,
which is remarkable. I mean, it's one of those like little moments of alchemy, isn't it, where a director and an actor just bring the best out in each other. And you really feel that with Christoph Waltz when he's on. I mean, I think Christoph Waltz is always good in anything he's in. He's one of those actors who, even in a bad film, you can't really see anything negative about him because he brings everything to the role. But in Tarantino movies, there is this weird sort of like spark that happens, and he just brings this enormous presence to the roles. And obviously, it's lovely that in both of those, I know we're not going to be talking about Django tonight, but it's wonderful that in both of those roles he gets to play almost polar opposites of each other, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, because Hans Landa is utterly irredeemable in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
An absolute monster to the Jewish people across France, an absolute terrifying tyrant. And then we reveal that he's just a spineless coward who will be happy to sell out his own side for the promise of a pardon in a nice house in America. It's a phenomenal performance, and it's well worth the Oscar. Well worth the Oscar.
Oh, well worth it. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, we're not talking Django, but his performance in Django Unchained is so good. It's my favorite. It's like my favorite performance of his, bar none. And the what he does in Inglourious Basterds is just a precursor to what he does in Django for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a phenomenal role that like both of these were, and they both deserve the Oscars that he won on it. And like you said, Quentin Tarantino, he's got a really good ability to bring out the best in actors, no matter
absolutely.
what, like from the biggest to the smallest, from the most well-known to the most obscure. And he's done it so many times that he's reinvigorated so many people's careers that he's just that good of a filmmaker. And it's so funny too, because sure, Tarantino is well respected and a lot of people like him, but there's so many in the like film fan community, I would say, that kind of shit on him. And I'm always like, how can you say that about Tarantino? You might not like his movies, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying people can't like his movies or whatever, but you can't deny how good of a filmmaker he really is and how good of a director he really is.
It's almost become the sort of the fashionable thing to push back against Tarantino as a filmmaker, which utterly baffles me. There's a fairly famous British critic called Mark Kermode, who I'm a big fan of his. I think he tends to be one of those critics who's very aware of the audience the film is aimed at. So if a film comes along that he knows isn't really for him, he tends to review it as such, and he'll be aware that, this isn't really for me, but I appreciate how it might work.
Good.
And he does this thing with every Tarantino film, which is at times infuriating, but I also appreciate where he gets frustrated by Tarantino because he appreciates how great he is. He just doesn't really like his later work. But he can at least, like you said, at least appreciate the craft on show. And even if the film doesn't work for him, he can appreciate just how talented he is as a director and what he's pulling out of the actors on set.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's funny too, because I have heard that from other people that they just don't enjoy Tarantino's later work. And I'm like, these more recent movies are, to me, at least to me, the best that he's done so far. Yep. Every movie he's done is just really well done, even if they don't completely speak to me. And we'll get into that with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I enjoy the movie, but it's not fully my thing. And whereas some of the other ones are, and they're still, like, I feel like they're still better than, like, at least better than Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. And I know that's sacrilege because everybody loves Pulp Fiction so much, but I'm like, it was his second movie. He's advanced as a filmmaker so much more beyond that.
Well, and I mean, with Pulp Fiction, there's an element of he's not yet the Tarantino that we come to know and love, and he's not yet the Tarantino who has the complete power of the edit, and so that film does at points. I know it's quite a lengthy film as well, but it does feel restrained a little bit, and it does feel that he's maybe got an editor there who's really helping to guide his hand and cut things out, because obviously as his movies go on, they do become sort of longer, and I've heard it argued that they become slightly sort of bloated a little bit, and I don't know if I agree with that, but then that might just be because I'm such a fan of the sort of the dialogue, of the performances he manages to get, and for a lot of these films, I often feel, well, I could just hang out with these characters on screen for a couple of hours, just watch them, like going to the shops and hanging out with each other, going for dinner, because they're so fully formed, and they're so there's a weight of history to each character. You feel that, and you don't always get that in films, even like from larger directors. But you feel that Tarantino has crafted these characters and made them just exactly what we see on screen. But you know that there's so much history to each one. I love all that stuff. I mean, like, and then like there's little grace notes of things like the way in which some of his characters then link up with other movies that he's done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I think in Inglourious in particular, I think there's two who are linked to characters in True Romance that he wrote. And I love that. I mean, those are the little things that if you're like a deep cut Tarantino fan, or like catnip, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. But you don't need to pick up on them to really appreciate the rest of the movie. But it's lovely that they're layered through it anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think that's part of what makes Tarantino such a good director, and in effect, because he's the writer as well, is that he makes such good characters. And that's what you're paying attention to more than even what's going on. It's the characters, their dialogue, so much of the world building just for them that you want to stay with these characters. And like you said, Michael Fassbender's character in Inglourious Basterds is very short, but it's so meaty during the time that he's there, and not just in the dialogue, but also in the way he acts it, both like in the part where he's talking to the character that Mike Myers plays, which I can't remember offhand, and also later on in the bar. These performances that he's doing are so good that even though it's very short, it's a very small role, it's a very lasting impression you have of him as an actor and the character itself. And that's what I enjoy with his movies, is that these characters, these actors, they are obviously taking great pleasure in being these characters and in inhabiting these roles so much that you just feel how much passion that everybody has. Like, nobody seems to be half-assing it. They are giving their all. They are doing everything for the writing and to make this movie the best it can be.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And as you said, those tend to be the things that you will return to, that that make you come back to the movie. For all the sort of the hyper, over the top, bloody violence and mayhem that occurs in both films at points. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but as a filmmaker, as he gets older, he learns that those things aren't really what's going to give him a legacy. Those are the things that are, it may be like shorthand for Tarantino, bloody violence and pushing boundaries, but that's not the thing that will make him. That's not the thing that people will remember 50 years from now. I mean, when someone talks about Tarantino to me, the first thing that crops up to my head is the dialogue, it's the writing, it's the characters. I mean, and that goes right back to Reservoir Dogs. I mean, that opening scene in the diner, from day one, from the opening scene that we spend with Tarantino as a director in his first feature film, he puts that front and center, and he shows you how important that is to him as a filmmaker. And like, yep, we've got the bloody violence, and we've got all these things to hook in an audience and to make it a bit more, to bring in more people who are going to come for the craziness. But as he gets older, as he matures as a director, the character work, the script becomes more important and gets pushed more to the front. And Inglourious is a great example of that, because there are moments of horrendous violence throughout, like genuine. I mean, there's one scene in particular which I don't know how spoilerific you want to get. So
spoilers are fine here. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Like the scene where when Christoph Waltz says Hans Landa kills Diane Kruger's Bridget von Hammersmith in the theater. Yes. I find that difficult to watch at the best of times, but especially when you know. I mean, have you read the story? I mean, Tarantino talks about it openly. It wasn't like a big secret or anything, but I mean, those are his hands, in the frame, and that he had agreed with Diane Kruger beforehand to actually cut off her
choke
airway.
Her. Yeah,
and it's, whilst I appreciate the commitment to the part, it makes me uncomfortable. I think the problem is I recently read an excerpt from There's a Canadian actress, Sarah Polley, who I'm a big fan of. I think she's a terrific actress, and she just released a memoir, and it's been sort of serialized in one of the British newspapers. It's called Run Towards the Danger. And she was in the Baron von Munchausen when she was a little girl, and she talks about the effect and power that these directors have on. I mean, she was a child at the time, but she talks about like Terry Gilliam and the power he had over the entire cast, and putting people in these situations where they didn't feel they could say no, that were clearly dangerous.
Right.
And obviously, Tarantino has now had a reputation for that with what happened with Uma Thurman on the set of Kill Bill.
Thurman on Kill Bill.
Yep. Yeah. So that sort of stuff, like I said, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I think it's just at the forefront of my head because I recently read that piece in The Guardian. But yeah, as I was saying, it's peppered with those moments of extreme violence. But the thing that will always bring me back to Inglourious in particular is the writing. And that opening scene is the sort of like a perfect snapshot of a perfect Tarantino scene. Mm-hmm. It's clever. It's ridiculously well written. I think he regards it actually as the best thing he's ever written, and I think I would agree with him. That opening scene, and it features one of the greatest film performances I've seen ever. I mean, I genuinely think Christoph Waltz in that scene is transcendental. He's on another level from everyone else.
Oh yeah,
and it's horrifying and upsetting and oddly funny and quirky and weird. It's got all the hallmarks of Tarantino, and it features one of my favorite things that he does across his entire work, which is where about halfway through the scene they suddenly switch to English. And I love it. The economy of what he's doing there is brilliant because it's wonderful for the audience. And I remember the first time I saw it, you kind of laugh and you think, well, this is a bit convenient that they're now speaking English. And it's only as you reach the end of the scene that you realize, well, yes, it is convenient, but it's also a pivotal part of the scene you're watching because obviously what unfolds. Utterly spellbinding.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think to your mention of the difference between the dialogue and the extreme violence and stuff. Whereas, yes, we're getting a lot of extreme violence in these movies, and I would say in this latter half of his movies from Inglourious Basterds on, yes, you're getting large amounts of extreme violence, but I think that it's balanced well with equal to even more dialogue, character building, all of this. The violence is there, yes, but the violence is there to, I guess, kind of punctuate the amount of talking to kind of move it along, I guess, to keep things from being getting too bogged down in the dialogue or whatever. And also because it's on brand for Tarantino. Tarantino likes to make violent movies that are very intelligent, very smart, very talkative, which is a good balance. I think that when you go into a movie like that, especially the types of movies that he likes to make, that's what you hope for and expect. So
yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I would like to know what people thought initially when they went to see the film we're going to come on to talk about in a bit, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because for the longest time, there's nothing like that. That's completely absent from the film. There's no such thing as there's no real violence. There's a couple of fight scenes throughout the film, peppered here and there, but largely it's an exercise in restraint for Tarantino. And, I think maybe that's why I remember at the time the reviews were a bit mixed, and audience reactions to it were a bit mixed as well, because I don't think people quite knew what they were getting. And it is interesting because, as you said, that sort of hyper violent style is such a key part of Tarantino's oeuvre and part of his DNA almost, that when you take it out of a film, it's fascinating to see what you're left with. And personally, I think you're left with something pretty special.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of I've heard a lot of people talk about how Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is not their favorite movie. I've seen quite a few people like on even in Letterboxd or whatever, calling it one of his most self-indulgent movies because it is very much about Hollywood and about this era of Hollywood that Tarantino himself idolizes in a way.
Absolutely.
And I understand that criticism to an extent, but I think that, you're right in that taking out that violence, because there's not much violence. It's not really until the very end that you get an extended amount of it. Mostly
Mm-hmm.
it's, little bits here and there, and it's very tame compared to what we get at the very end. But at the very end, it's, a very shocking amount. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's what kind of throws people with this movie is it's more about the characters.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
just like all the movies are, but by taking out a lot of by making it not really an action movie like the rest of his are, you you have only the characters to live
Mm-hmm.
with and to enjoy. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood reminds me a lot of Jackie Brown in that way. Jackie Brown is not a very violent movie at all, and is in some ways a response to the criticisms of the amount of violence that had been in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction up until that point. And
Mm-hmm.
so he reined it back, made it just a bunch of people hanging out. He calls it his hangout movie. And I think that's where we've gotten to with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well, is that it's more of a kind of a hangout movie.
Yep.
Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth are hanging out a lot, talking to each other, and you get and Sharon Tate hanging out a lot. So you're getting all these characters who are just kind of hanging out, doing their thing,
Mm-hmm.
moving through their lives, and but it's more of the examination of Rick Dalton's career and everything. And I get, like, I guess if that's not your thing and you're not interested in that kind of thing, sure, that's not what you're looking for in a Quentin Tarantino movie. But I'm just like, for me, anytime it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, I'm like, whatever you got for me, let me go along for the ride.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it as well. Like, there will never be a Tarantino movie released where I don't find myself like, well, I'll be spending some time here. I'm going to go to the cinema, and that'll never happen when I don't go and see it on the big screen, because
Exactly.
he's a director that I always get excited about whenever I hear he's got a new project on the go. In terms of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, cards on the table. The first time I saw this film, I went to the cinema and I came out, and the first thing I was with someone and I said, I think that might be my favorite Tarantino film. Like, the moment I came out, I think it might be. And then I sat with it for a while and watched it on Blu-ray when it was released. And second time around, I thought, yep, I think it is. And then having watched it the other night for the podcast, it is cemented there. I adore the bones of this film. I think it's his masterpiece. I think it's the thing that people look back on after he retires, if he does retire after his 10th movie, as he keeps threatening to.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the key work that will be looked back on after the sort of the glamour and chaos of his earlier movies fades, and the sort of maybe the exploitative nature of something like Django or Inglourious fades. I think this is the film. It's his love letter to his own personal history, as well as this sort of halcyon Hollywood time that just doesn't exist anymore. The only place that exists is in his memory and on the big screen. And I absolutely love it. It's almost perfect for me. I mean, and I appreciate all the criticisms people have of it. I understand them.
Mm-hmm.
But I disagree with most of them, and I push back in the strongest terms possible. The idea, I mean, it is slightly meandering and slightly leisurely. It takes its time going where it's going, but I think there's a joy to be had in that. Those characters are so likable.
Yeah.
Like, everyone who appears on screen in that film, I think is at the top of their game, much like in Inglourious. But like, who wouldn't want to hang out with Cliff Booth? He is the coolest man who ever lived.
Dude murdered his wife, and I still want to hang out with him.
Yeah, but even the ambiguity of that, I love.
Right.
It's like, did he murder his wife? So, well, maybe he did. We don't know. I love that, and he consistently proves himself throughout the film to be a reasonably decent man, in spite of the rumors that hang over his head, which I love. And DiCaprio's Rick Dalton is an absolute work of art. I love that character, riddled with insecurities and constantly second guessing himself, desperately clinging on to the remnants of a career that's flushing itself down the toilet as time slips away from him. I love their friendship. I love how completely, no questions asked, Cliff is by his side. He's his pal. He's always going to be there for him. He's always there to help him out. And Rick is a bit useless at times, but he always manages to get there in the end. I mean, the scene where he has that breakdown in his trailer after messing up the scene that he just starred in, honestly, it has me in stitches every time I watch it. It's so funny, and it's DiCaprio really let loose a little bit, and I love seeing him like that.
And the funny thing about that was an entirely improvised scene too. And so, I mean, that is literally just Tarantino easing back and going, give me what you got. And Leonardo DiCaprio just going with it, which is fantastic. So,
and it's like, I think the critique that the film's a little slow, I think I push back on, because I think people are maybe missing what Tarantino's doing. I mean, this is only, I've seen this shared a few times, so you may have heard this sort of reading of it, but I see it as, I mean, these characters don't know what's about to happen. And I think if you're an audience member going to see this film, you probably know enough of the broad strokes of the Sharon Tate story to understand where this film is moving to. Right. And it's almost like we're watching the last days of Hollywood unfold before us, and it's like, because I think that the Tate murders were very much like, I think there's a sort of psychological scar across Hollywood after those murders, and that kind of ushers in the 70s, and things get a lot darker, and the title of this film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it tells you up front that it's a fairy tale, and this is Tarantino, much in a similar but different way to Inglourious. This is Tarantino rewriting history, and what he's doing here is he's stopping the event that ended the period in history that he adores, that he wishes was still around today. And that's, I mean, that the final scene after the madness has happened, the final scene of Rick going up the valley to speak to Sharon Tate, and the camera kind of pulls back. Oh, it gives me goosebumps. And I remember the first thing I saw, I got a little bit teary-eyed, because the shot almost as if they're ghosts, that as the camera pulls back, and you're just watching this sort of beautiful world that we know didn't happen. We know that this was an impossibility. But Tarantino is insistent on reframing it and reclaiming that the past that was lost because of the sort of the violent acts of the Manson family. And I will say very quickly, I won't name the person in case they listen to this, because I don't want to upset them. But the person I saw it with had no idea anything about Sharon Tate or the Manson murders. And when we came out of the cinema, they said to me, so I mean, they were a lot like the Manson family, weren't they? It's like, they were the Manson family. They actually. So I think that's where they made a mistake by taking out. There's a deleted scene where Manson comes up to the house at one point, and I think that's still in the cut. Is it? Okay. Yeah. I watched it. I only know because I watched it last night. It's very brief. I mean, he's literally there for like maybe. I watched it today, but to be fair, I was running so behind that I did actually fast forward through a couple of bits just so I could get to the end. I mean, I've seen it a few times, but yeah. And look, Margot Robbie in that film as well. I love the performance. I know she got a lot of, Tarantino got a lot of criticism for sort of the lack of dialogue that he gave her, because she doesn't really have much to say. But I think that really does a disservice to the performance and to the role that he made. She hangs over that film like almost like the spirit of cinema, like the spirit of Hollywood, And it's, again, if you know what's coming to her, there's a sadness laced throughout the whole film that the audience will feel. Obviously, the person I saw it with didn't have that, which is quite interesting. Right. But like, I think you should feel that sadness, but you should feel that she is this sort of ethereal creature who is the last vestiges of a bygone era, and we know that her time is limited. And then, as we said, Tarantino wonderfully undercuts that notion in the film's final act. And I would say, much like Inglourious, both these films are a love letter to cinema. I mean, crikey, in Inglourious, I mean, the plan for what happens at the end when they take out the Third Reich, the plan is hatched by a cinema owner who literally wipes out the Third Reich using flammable film reels. So it's like cinema itself is responsible in Tarantino's world for ending the Third Reich, which I love.
Right.
And this film kind of carries that forward. That it drips out of every frame just how much he's in love with the idea of what cinema is. And I adore this film.
Yeah, there's a lot more parallels to these two movies than I originally had considered when pairing them together. I said, when I was pairing things together, I really wanted to pair Django and Hateful Eight together because they're each both more in the westerns, and so I was kind of left with okay, well, both of these are revisionist histories, with both definitely the endings of both of these movies vary from actual history in both in very good ways. And so, but also, definitely the notion and the nature of cinema and how they both are in both of these movies is definitely a nice little connection as well. So, and because Inglourious Basterds really does have a lot of, you push it aside, but because of Shoshana / Emmanuel's connection to this cinema and the ending being in this cinema are integral to the movie itself. And I mean, and not only that, but you got Frederick Zoller's The Nation's Pride movie, and the nature of film itself is so embedded in Inglourious Basterds that because you kind of it's kind of underlying it all rather than be more explicit like it is in Once Upon a Time. So it's a nice little contrast for both of them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also, this may show how unswitched on I was the first couple of times I watched Inglourious, but this is the first time I watched it where I realized that the plan would actually have worked much better had the Allied forces not gotten involved, because when they get rumbled, that's what causes Christoph Waltz's character Landa to leave the cinema. Had they not been there, I think Shoshana's plan would have worked just as well, and it would have killed everyone, including Landa himself.
Yeah,
I completely missed that the first couple of times. It was only the other night I was like, well, wait a minute. If they just never turned up, would anything really have been that different? Probably not. No, I think it actually may have worked a little bit better.
Yeah, I think everything would have worked out like much, much better. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, it still worked out really well in the end, but yeah,
absolutely.
Plus, I mean, we did get to see the scene of Hitler just being decimated. So that's pretty cathartic on its own.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Both films, I remember both films received a fair amount of criticism for the nature of the final act's violence, like how over the top, bloody, and crazy it gets, which you don't expect, obviously, in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because it doesn't really hint that it's going there. But we get there. But to be honest with you, I find it hard to have too much sympathy for either the Third Reich or the Manson family. It's like they deserve pretty much what happens to them. I don't watch that and go, oh, you've gone a bit far there, guys. You should rein it in a little bit. I mean, I don't sit there and think, oh, poor Hitler. Oh man, that's a shame.
That's a shame. No, it's okay. Bummer.
Yeah, I mean, and I do have to say it, because every time I watch the film, it drives me bonkers just saying Inglourious. I do feel that Eli Roth is badly miscast actually as Donnie Donowitz. He would be the exception to what I said before. Yeah, he looks like a haunted ventriloquist doll in this film. There's, I don't know what performance he's giving. It's weird. It's really weird.
Yeah, because his accent varies wildly through it. He is very inconsistent. And I don't feel like Eli Roth is that great of an actor. So I know that it's Tarantino giving his buddy a role. But
that's exactly it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it feels really out of place in the movie. Because Eli Roth doesn't doesn't feel like he can exist in World War II. For some reason, everybody else seems fine. I can accept it, but for some reason, his character just feels so apart, like so not a part of that world. And yeah, I was watching it last night, and I just like, as soon as he came on screen, I was like, yeah, no, this does not feel right at all. Like he's the one bit of the whole movie that just takes me out for a second.
100%. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm not even really a big BJ Novak fan. I find him a difficult presence to like. But even he in this, like, it works really well. You know, like teaming him up with Aldo as, what is it they call him? The little man, which
the little man. Yeah,
that joke cracks me up every time. It's so funny.
Because he's not even the smallest dude in the team either.
Absolutely. Aldo and the little man.
Yeah. No, it's great.
And just going back to Once Upon a Time briefly as well, I think it's the best example of like pure uncut Tarantino, where the criticism of the film that I do agree with is it's a bit self-indulgent. But again, it's a director operating at the top of his game, you know, and I'm okay with that. It would be different if, and look, I'm a slave to Marvel movies as much as anyone, right? I'm a big fan of them. They're great blockbusters. Come up every few months, and I have a great amount of time with them, right? So I don't have a problem with a film being too long if it can justify its runtime. And if I'm willing to sit there and watch like one of these big Marvel spectacles like Endgame, which runs for 3 hours, I'm going to sit there and watch a Tarantino movie that runs for about the same time as well. I don't think that's a problem.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'm the same way. I'm a huge Marvel fan, both originally as a comic book reader. I have been all my life, and then also with these movies. But yeah, I mean, if you sit down to a Tarantino movie and you know it's going to be 2.5, 3 hours long, I have absolutely no problems doing that. You know, same with the Marvel movies. Yeah. I know that when I go into those movies, I am going to be entertained, and I can't say that for a lot of people's movies. You know, I see 3-hour runtimes on some of these movies, and I'm like, I don't know about this. This person's maybe not so good at that runtime, because that's the thing is like if I can watch a Tarantino movie or a Marvel movie, and I never feel that 3 hours. They're entertaining throughout so much that
I'm the same.
You just don't feel that. But you get somebody else who, you know, there's movies that I've watched, even on, I'll say on Netflix. Some of the Netflix movies tend to run just like, and I've noticed it. A lot of them run about a half hour too long. And that's how it feels with those movies. Is just like trim that just a little bit more. And but yeah, definitely not with Tarantino. You sit down, you enjoy that movie fully.
Yeah, I mean, even if you 100%, yeah, but even when you look at something like Once Upon a Time, and again, much like in Inglourious, it does feel a bit segmented at times. You know, like there's the Brad Pitt when he's on the roof fixing the aerial, and he's having his little flashback to when he was fighting Bruce Lee, which again, I love that scene. I know it's a little bit controversial, and there's people pushing back on it. That film, that scene cracks me up every time. I think it's brilliantly well pitched, but you could trim that from the film and not really lose anything in terms of the narrative flow. But why would you? You know, imagine having that and deciding, no, you know, we need to get it down to like 2 hours 10. Let's just lose that 20 minutes, and you're cutting out proper cinematic gold. Where, as I said, you can objectively say the film doesn't need it, and it doesn't really add too much to the overall film, but it adds this lovely little bit of flavor, and it gives you everything you need to know about Cliff Booth as a character. I think in that scene, it's wonderful visual shorthand. But I like I said, it's one of his films I love to bits, and I push back whenever anyone comes at me for criticisms on it. It's like, no, I'm not having this. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, going back to Inglourious Basterds, it's funny to compare the performances between these two with Brad Pitt. His Aldo Rain is obviously a much more stylized, more out there performance.
Yes, it is.
It's Aldo the Apache, which, I mean, there's and this is another thing that I enjoy about Tarantino is he does things where especially in these later movies, where you get these little things like they never remark about his, or at least I'm not remembering at the moment that they remark about his obvious neck wound that he's been hung at some point.
Yeah.
And that could have an effect on the way he talks, so he's got more of a, Brad Pitt's voice is naturally gravelly as it is, but it feels like he's making it extra gravelly throughout the movie to account for that. So I enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. As I said earlier, it's like the characters feel so fully formed. You feel the weight of their history, even when it is a performance that's a little bit, I would almost say, like caricaturish from Brad Pitt in that film. He is so over the top and silly, but yet utterly compelling. And like you said, something as simple as like the big scar he has on his neck, like you said, it implies that at one point they've tried to hang him and somehow he survived. I love it. I love that he doesn't feel the need to explain that. It's just a little character beat that, again, if you're switched on and you see it, it probably adds a lot to how you see how tough this guy is standing in front of you.
Yeah. And that's what I think is fun too, is because you can make up your own backstory, given what little bit of information we get about him. Obviously, towards the end, he remarks about this thing about moonshining, and so there's these bits about his past that you get, not a lot, but you get just enough that you can start to make up your own stories in your own head. And that's what I love about movies that really connect you with the characters, is that you want to know more. You want to get that history, and then you start to make up that history on your own. It's like, okay, well, what is his story? What is Londa's story? What is all, the big characters. And I love that, like even with Fassbender's character, that you get this history of him prior to seeing him, that he was a film critic, and he's written a couple of books, and obviously both of the books are very much his specialty seems to be German films prior to the Nazi takeover, and so, which is a very rich, deep part of film history that influences a lot of film after that point. And so it's interesting to see that, and if anybody knows that, if you're a film fan, that demarcation line between the German films before the Nazis took over and what comes after is such a huge shift. And what they did prior to the Nazis taking over, that was so influential to filmmaking that came later, that you see this, it's kind of unsaid and unwritten, but it's such a detriment to the filmmaking in general, that what the Germans had done, that the Nazis had done, and you just feel that weight in that movie if you're aware of it. So it kind of hangs over it all.
Like, not to have a shameless plug for an upcoming project of mine, but
go ahead.
Myself and a colleague Dan Owen, we are currently cultivating a podcast called Vampire Videos, where we're going through the history of vampire cinema over the last 100 years. And one of the films that we started with was F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. And it's a fascinating watch, and it's got all the hallmarks of sort of early German impressionism and expressionism, sorry. And it's so interesting. It's and like you said, the weight of the history of German cinema is something that Tarantino's kind of picking the scab at a little bit in the film, without going too deep into it. And in fact, funnily enough, one of the other films that we covered has got a lot in common with both of these films. Have you ever seen Shadow of the Vampire?
Yes, with Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe, yeah. So I've seen it, saw it years ago, but didn't really have a clear memory of it, and obviously revisited it recently for the podcast. And that's another film that is absolutely obsessed with the the fabric of film and how things are put
Yes.
together. And again, it also has that sort of fake history about it, where it's
Yeah.
interested in telling you a full story of Nosferatu being an actual vampire, but at the same
Right.
time, it's got a lot to say about filmmaking and German cinema and what became of it. Having watched it so recently, it was kind of in my head a lot when I was watching both Inglourious and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's fascinating. And even, I mean, one of the other subtle moments I absolutely love in this film is when they're in the bunker playing the Guess Who game,
Yes.
and the Nazi who will ultimately rumble them. I think it's Hellstrom. Is that right? Is that his name?
Hellstrom. Yeah.
Major Hellstrom. Yeah, that's it. He has King Kong on his head. That's who he is.
Hmm.
And what he does is he gives this phenomenal intellectual critique of the film King Kong in order to
Yep.
discover who he is. Which, now, don't get me wrong, I've heard it said that that's actually sort of like he's just basically a mouthpiece for Tarantino, voicing his
Right.
own opinions of what King Kong is, an allegory for the slave trade. And but it's fascinating. I mean, there are layers upon layers upon layers in the film. And it's so I totally missed it the first time, and I didn't realize what they were doing. And when I rewatched it the other night, it's just such an eye opener that to how much is packed into this film, and packed into such short scenes. It's absolutely terrific. Tarantino's he is fascinating. He's a wonderful writer, but whenever he does stuff like that, I'm always reminded of a Fiona Apple quote, where she was talking about the night that she gave up cocaine forever. She said that every addict should just get locked in a private movie theater with Quentin Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson on coke, and they'll never want to do it again. And it's just like, yeah, that sums up the way I imagine Tarantino put. Like, he's got so many ideas and it's constantly firing all over the time, and he's just going to put everything in that he can. But
Yeah.
somehow the talent of the man, he makes it work. It doesn't feel stuffed. And as I said, like having gone back to Inglourious for first time in a number of years, I was uncovering things that I'd missed the first time round, or the second time round as well. And I love that. And I hope that, like, 5, 6, 7 years from now, when I'm revisiting Once Upon a Time, that I similarly feel that, oh, holy shit, I missed that. Oh, that's brilliant. That's a reference to this. And there's just so much going on.
Oh yeah, no, and I think and that's why I like doing this podcast now. Is I like doing these double features, is that a
Mm.
lot of times connections that you don't realize are there reveal themselves during the discussion. And
Mm.
so you know while watching both of these movies, but then also while discussing these movies, it's you realize that like we've said, that cinema plays such a huge part of Inglorious Bastards that
Yeah.
you it's there on the surface, but you're not really thinking about how he is
Mm.
responding to, like, not necessarily responding, but in a way he's showing his love for the art form in a
Mm-hmm.
way that I think he's kind of testing it out in a way that is then played out fully in Once Upon a Time.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I think
you
that's right.
get in the beginning in Inglorious Bastards, you're getting some film talk. You're getting a lot of film theory, film knowledge, because he's talking about the
Mm-hmm.
nitrate film and how flammable it is and everything, and
Mm-hmm.
talking about how and that's interesting, like, because you don't think about that stuff unless you're deep into Hollywood lore or film lore, then you're not going to know that kind of information. So it's fascinating to watch this movie
Mm.
now, and and especially after having now watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and just kind of like feeling that the way that he is embedding so much of this film knowledge into stuff, like you said, the King Kong story, the stuff about the nitrate film,
Mm-hmm.
um, just it's so much that's, and even in the nature of the German, like, filmmaking at the time, because they were making movies that were, once the Nazis got in control of the film industry there, every movie they made was propaganda.
Yeah.
Whether you believe it, whether you saw it that way or not, it was all propaganda.
Mhm.
um, Especially a lot of the stuff that Leni Riefenstahl was doing. And so it's interesting to see that play out, because that's the Frederick Zoller character too. He tries to play this guy who is just, oh, I'm just a regular guy. I was put in a position where I had to become this hero, blah blah blah. But this darker nature plays itself out through
Yeah.
that too as well. And I found that fascinating too, because this his sure, he probably was originally this kind of just regular guy who was
Mhm.
put in this impossible situation. And but once he was made into this larger than life character, that's what he became. And the myth itself of his own character, he became that character in a way, and he
Hmm.
would not be denied. and
I,
and that
I
was
find
fascinating to me.
Yeah, I find that character really interesting as well, because I kind of took that as a comment from Tarantino on not just Germany's like need for propaganda, but the West's as well. Because I mean,
Oh yeah.
Frederick Zoller is effectively the German Audie Murphy, sorry, isn't he?
Right.
Like it's the same notion of like, regular soldier done good becomes superstar actor in order to kind of promote an agenda and promote a one side of the war. And I think Tarantino is quite cleverly putting that in there, because you're right, everything you said is spot on. I mean, about German cinema and the sort of the propaganda machine that Goebbels started to pump out during the war, and back home, I suppose there was a lot of that going on as well in certain
Oh
parts.
yeah.
And I just think that I think it's a lovely way of Tarantino kind of having his cake and eating it. He's making that point on both sides, which I find fascinating. It's really, as I said, the film is layered, and it just, every time you see it, it warrants so much more discussion. And like, there's so many people in it, or so many characters in it, that every time I watch it, I kind of like, there's something new there's
Yeah.
someone new rather that I'm really interested in and would like to know more about. And this time around, actually, it's funny. It was Frederick Zoller. I mean, I think Daniel Bruhl. I think this is one of his early sort of like English speaking performances, isn't it? It's kind of one of his big breakthrough hits that would make him a huge sort of star in Western cinema as well. He's phenomenal in this, and because
Oh
he
yeah.
does have moments where you can buy that sort of like wide-eyed, sort of almost innocent, like, well, I was put in an impossible situation, like, as he's trying desperately to woo Shosanna to his side, and then he turns very quickly in that final act of the film to reveal this sort of like monstrous side as well. I think that's a really
Mm-hmm.
complex performance, and his constant sort of like courting of Shosanna is amazing. And in fact, his quoting of her leads it to again another underrated but one of my favorite moments in the film is when she's kind of brought to the dinner table to meet Goebbels, and they're talking about
Mm-hmm.
moving the whole production to her cinema, and she's forced to confront Landa, obviously, who she'd managed to escape for a few years beforehand. I love that scene. The notion of her having to sit and have strudel with the monster who murdered her family, and
Yeah.
it's so painful to watch. And the minute he leaves the table and she just kind of breaks down, oh,
Yeah.
Melanie Laurent is spectacular in this film throughout. But that's one of the absolute highlights. She also gets that magnificent moment at the end of the film where she almost looks like an evil Wizard of Oz
Yeah.
as her image appears through the smoke and flames as the Nazis are burning. I really I love what she does. And again, she's an actress who, I mean, she works constantly, but you don't see her in a lot of sort of English language movies, which
Right.
is disappointing. But I mean, not that I'm averse to German cinema or any foreign cinema, but I think you have to go looking for those films a lot of the time. They don't get served up to you quite as readily.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she does. She's phenomenal, and I think I've only seen her in a couple of things. I know I believe she's in the first Now You See Me movie.
Mm.
And so like, for me, I haven't had a lot of experience. I'm being a French actress. I'm sure she's mostly in French movies.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and so it's I but she's so phenomenal in this. And it's like you said, that scene in the restaurant with her with Londa is is great because you see her, you can see she's holding back, like she's,
Yeah.
she's holding back all the emotion and trying to keep herself steady the entire time,
Mm.
and just like waiting for the shoe to drop on her to find out
Mm.
what the next thing is, because he's such a diabolical person. And
Yeah.
the audience too, you don't know, you like, does he know who she is? And you're just waiting for him to break out, and he never does. And as soon as he leaves, she just breaks down, and it's so emotional. You're just like,
Mm.
you're just tore up by it, and
Yeah.
it's such a great performance.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself like genuinely breathless after that scene, and
Mhm.
when she finally lets it all out, you almost let it out with her, because
Yeah,
he does such a great job of putting you right there in her shoes. You kind of feel the absolute horror that must be going through her head. Not just the fact that, as you said, she could be discovered at any moment because this guy is the best at what he does, and surely he'll remember who she is, but thankfully he doesn't. But also, imagine having to sit there and act as if everything's fine when you're sitting across from
yeah,
the man who murdered everyone you loved.
yeah.
It's a magnificent scene, and it's absolutely brilliant performance. And again, it comes at a portion of the film which is almost entirely spoken in another language, and
Yeah.
I think it's to Tarantino's credit that he's able to almost like stealth sneak a foreign language film in as a big
Oh
blockbuster,
yeah.
because I think the stat is something like only 30% of the film is spoken in English,
Yeah.
and you don't really feel that. I mean, I can only speak personally as a viewer. Foreign language films, subtitled films, I don't mind that at all. It's not a barrier to me to watching something. But this film, you don't even really notice it. I don't think. It's so expressive, and there's so many other things. The fact that they're not speaking English almost doesn't register in your head for a long time.
Right. Yeah, you get pulled into
Mm.
the entire um moment of it all,
Mm-hmm.
and you just, like you said, you're left breathless at the end because you're on edge waiting for something to happen, and when it doesn't and he leaves, we're all just like, ah, and you don't realize that, during that whole time, they're not speaking English, and they're switching between German and French and everything during that whole sequence. It's fascinating.
Do you
And
think? Do you think like
go
I mean
ahead.
that's another thing that these films have in common? I think is that remarkable sort of extended tension that they're able to build in certain moments, and
Mm,
that's missing from a few Tarantino films. They don't have exactly what these films have. Obviously, you've got the excruciating opening scene, you've got the bar bunker scene, you've got this scene, but then you jump over to Once Upon a Time, and you've got that. You've got the scene where Cliff goes to the ranch to visit his friend because he's not
mm-hmm.
convinced that these hippies should really be there, and like the first maybe I would say the first maybe 5 or 6 minutes of that scene, it feels like you're watching like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's almost
Yeah.
like the color scheme used, the shots
Yeah.
used. Honestly, it feels like like Toby Hooper stepped in just to direct a scene for him. And having just rewatched both these films, I know he's only going to do 10 movies, but I think there will be a loss to cinema if Tarantino doesn't turn his hand to a horror movie at some point. Because
Oh yeah.
obviously he's written the script for a few, and I think the most famous will be from Dusk Till Dawn, which he starred in.
Mm-hmm.
But as a director, his knack for horror and for building dread, I think, is almost unparalleled for a man
Oh
who's
yeah.
never actually made a horror film. And I think it'd be a great loss to cinema if he retires without making one.
Yeah, I would love to see him do something in that genre,
Mm-hmm.
for sure, because like you said, that suspense and tension that he builds, he would do so well in something that, like, and just like, but I think that's what I think that if he did another horror movie outside of From Dusk Till Dawn, I think that, it would be something, because you watch a lot of these movies, and
Mm-hmm.
while Inglourious Basterds is definitely a war movie and Django Unchained is a Western, that they are still filled with, it's not just those, and
Yeah.
like all of his movies. So even if he did a horror movie, it would be horror laced with other genres as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's what we would see as something sure that was maybe I would like to see it because I think that he could do something very Hitchcockian, very in
Hmm.
that. And I don't believe Hitchcock is one of his major influences. I don't think I've ever seen that mentioned or anything, but I feel like he could do something in that because Hitchcock was very much a master of suspense and tension.
Hmm.
And I feel like he could do an ode to that very well in a way that
Yeah.
not very many other filmmakers can.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to read in the trade presses over the next couple of months that Tarantino's working on a 3 hour horror masterpiece, my head would explode. It just
Right?
that's exactly what I want to hear. Let me hear that.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, where do you stand on that? Actually, I'm just curious to get your opinion. What do you think of the 10 films and out thing? Do you think that's something you'll abide by, or do you think you'll maybe find wiggle room there?
I that's what I'm interested in too is I I have a feeling that he may do the 10 and he's done in
Mm,
terms of directing. But there's the possibility that he could then transition into more writing and producing, having
mm.
other people direct his works.
Yeah, that's a good
I
shout.
think that could be a fascinating way of doing it because he would still, especially as a producer, he would still have a lot of control over the end product. Um, and we don't have a lot of those superstar producers anymore.
That's
Um,
true.
I can think of only a handful of people like Bruckheimer, Kevin Feige, um, that kind of that kind of people who transcend whoever the director is.
Mm,
And that used to be that's typically more of an old Hollywood thing. Val Lewton, David O. Selznick, that kind of stuff where the producer's name carried the weight more than the director did. And so I think that if he transitioned into more of that, uh, I would not be surprised at all.
yeah, I kind of hope for something like that. I mean, I do wonder if you're trying. Well, he's often talked, hasn't he, about like a sequel to Kill Bill somewhere down the road,
Mm-hmm.
and you do wonder if maybe in his head he thinks, well, I can do a 10 movies, and then I can go back to that and say, well, it's a continuation of this film, because he very much talks about Kill
Right.
Bill 1 and 2 are one movie,
Yeah.
so he's already using a little bit of sleight of hand to get round to his 10. So I wonder if maybe he might look at things like that, but I genuinely do think it'd be a shame if he does follow through with his long held edict that it was 10 then out, because like I said, I mean, I think was it like a year and a half, 2 years ago, he was talking about maybe doing a Star Trek movie. And
Star
again,
Trek. Yeah.
it's like even if you're not a Star Trek fan, I can't imagine anybody who heard that and wouldn't think, yeah, let me see that bit. That's
Right.
fascinating. I'd watch that. Yeah, because I mean, I've got friends who I mean, I quite like. I'm a self-confessed Trekkie. I do like Star Trek, but I've got friends who have no interest in that in the slightest who've commented. It's like, yeah, I think I'd tune in for a Tarantino Star Trek just to see what it looked like, because I can't even imagine it, like, where he would start, and and
Yeah.
and it's like that with like most genres that he hasn't touched yet. You think, like I say, horror is the big one for me as a total horror geek, but like pretty much
Right.
any. I mean, what does a Tarantino rom com look like? It's like there's
Yeah.
all these things. It's like yeah, and I think he would have a great ear for something like a rom com, because his writing between his dialogue between characters, it just sparkles. It's as I've said maybe like 50 times on this podcast. It's one of my favorite things about Tarantino. But like to let him loose on other genres, I think would be wonderful to see. But I know he's very precious about what he does and doesn't do, which I suppose is to be admired, doesn't it? He doesn't want to be one of those directors who just like makes a film because it's expected of him to be making a film. He waits until he
Right.
has exactly what he wants to do, and goes after that with like 120% commitment and drive, which I think that's to be admired. But as an audience member and as a fan of Tarantino, as I said, I'll be disappointed if it is 10 and done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would be very disappointed if it's just 10 and done. I think that, going back to what you said about doing the different genres, I think that would be fascinating. Because, it would be, even like I said, even if he doesn't direct them, even if we get more produced and written stuff that he handpicks directors that could do him justice, and that he had a deft hand in, like in the way that Spielberg movies of the 80s, there's a lot of work that Spielberg produced but didn't direct. And even though they weren't directed by him, they still feel very much like a Steven Spielberg movie because they were produced by him. And you can tell
absolutely.
that he had a very heavy hand in guiding those movies. Poltergeist, Goonies, a lot of that stuff during that time, the Back to the Future movies, all of those are directed by different people, but you feel that heavy hand and feel like those movies are part of his overall world. And I feel like that if we got that with Tarantino, if he decides that he doesn't want to actually direct any movies, then we would get those the movies that feel like his movies that other people are doing. And that could be a very fascinating way to go with that.
Yeah,
but
I like that.
Go ahead.
Just thinking back to where we come in, and like the notion of like the perceived trendiness of pushing back against Tarantino as a director. That's one of those things that I'll never understand, and I do think it's one of those things that people won't really appreciate what they've lost until it's gone. And I think when he does like kind of hang up his directing hat, I do think though cinema will be the poorer for it. And I've never really thought about it. I've never really been forced to think about this in my own head, I suppose. But I do wonder where he stands in sort of the pantheon of the sort of great directors. I mean, I appreciate that he's never won an Oscar, but increasingly that seems like an utterly redundant yardstick to measure anyone's career by.
Yeah.
Like genuinely, I can't think of another filmmaker like throughout my lifetime as I've been growing up who has been as consistent as Tarantino. I don't think there's a bum note in his repertoire. There are some I don't enjoy as much as others. The only one that I struggle with, if I'm honest with you, is Death Proof. I don't think it always works, but there's enough in there to, that's had me revisit it a couple of times. Right. But I genuinely don't think there's another director who has been as consistent. And again, I think a lot of that will probably come down to the fact that he is so picky about the projects that he picks up.
Well, and talking about the having the impact on the culture as well. I mean, he created, in the wake of Pulp Fiction and Sense, he created a whole industry of movies that people associate with him, even when they aren't his movies. You get the Tarantino-esque of it all, and there's everybody trying to ape what he did, and you don't get that with a lot of directors. Like it's very few people who carry that kind of cultural weight, and especially for somebody who's not prolific like he is. He's, we get a movie out of him every, 2, 3, 5 years, something like that. And, we're coming at this year is the 30th anniversary of Reservoir Dogs. So it's 30 years of movies of his. And there's only been 9, 10 if you count both Kill Bills or whatever. But, it's shocking, not shocking. It's interesting to see and he's, since Pulp Fiction, he has had that weight to his name, and that it has been he's created an industry all of his own, and that's what I love about his work. Is there's very few directors that you can say that do that, like maybe Nolan, Shyamalan in a way, did that for a while. His name got tarnished for a while, but I think it's coming back around a little bit now.
I agree with that. Yeah.
But there's very few that you could say hold that same candle to him, and especially for as few movies as he's made. And that's the fascinating part. And we were talking about how with Inglourious Basterds, he'd been writing that script for 10 years. And I think that's where it boils down to, is rather than rushing into a new movie, he works on these movies for years, works on these scripts for years until they're just at the right pitch for him to make that movie. And I think that's what sets him above a lot of these people, especially in terms of writer directors, that he takes that time to really make the movie his own, really get it to where it needs to be, and before he even sets to filming it.
Well, I mean, that's another thing actually that links both these movies, isn't it? So, it was, as you said, it was a decade in the making to get Inglourious to where he wanted it to be before he began filming. But with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it began life as a novel he was writing, and then it was kind of during the writing process that he realized, no, actually, this is this is a film. So I know I don't know if you've read the novel because he has released it since. I've not gotten to it myself yet. It's sitting on my shelf somewhere.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to it yet either.
Yeah, it's having rewatched the film, I think it's lit a fire under my backside. So I maybe actually pick it up in the next month or two, and go for it. But yeah, I mean, and I agree 100% with what you're saying in terms of the influence that he's had on a generation of filmmakers that have come not just after him, but also a lot of his contemporaries. I think have been influenced by the stuff that he's done with the focus on diet, like snappy dialogue and character work. And oddly enough, this might seem like a stretch, but I do believe this. Things like the MCU is a great example of something that Tarantino was kind of introduced to our, like the idea of well, partly a shared universe because a lot of his movies kind of exist loosely within the same framework as each other. But also, I mean, I know he's incredibly unpopular at the moment, and rightly so. A guy like Joss Whedon, who, I mean, his entire like back catalogue of like his work on Buffy is all built on amazing character work and snappy dialogue, which he brought to that Avengers movie. And that Avengers movie kind of like set the blueprint for what the MCU was going to be going forward, which is populated by these like hyper stylized, incredibly clever, quick-witted characters who are always, making zingers or the, 2 steps ahead of the audience. And I think that's a Tarantino thing. It's like having these characters who all feel like they all feel wonderfully alive, and like I said, they all feel like people you just want to hang out with. And again, it's a strange comparison, but I think it's the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron. There's a scene that's set where they're all just kind of hanging out at a party, around maybe half an hour into the film. And I remember thinking at the time, it's like, I could watch a film that was just this. Just let me watch these characters bounce off each other. And it felt like obviously not quite to the standards of Tarantino, of course, but it does feel like it's kind of like an homage to the best of Tarantino, where he understands that the thing you're going to love about this, I mean, there might be blood and guts in a Tarantino movie, there might be massive special effects in a Marvel movie, but the thing that people come back for is the characters and the writing, the dialogue. Yes. And I would argue that with anyone. I think the MCU gets a bad rap for being, a bit too broad, and people are just looking for the pretty colors. I don't really think that's the case. I think what makes it so special is that there is a lot of care and attention put in the characters, and obviously, it's not going to appeal to everybody. Much like a Tarantino film doesn't appeal to everybody, but I do think that's one of its strengths, and I think he's certainly a filmmaker who was influenced by that sort of the rise of the auteur almost in terms of Tarantino's work, and that sort of like the strength and confidence to put character work in dialogue front and center.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I agree with you about the MCU movies, and I think that's something that, in the beginning, we had with the MCU movies, they kind of faltered a little bit. They're very uneven, and it's not until really, I think that Winter Soldier becomes a hit that they realize that, they really need to focus on the characters. And as much as the spectacle is fun and that's what people want to see, that without the character development, without that necessary world building, that people are just not going to be there. And I think that's part of the reason why, and I'm sure people are going to be mad at me, but that's, I think, the reason why the DC movies don't work as well. There are definitely some that work well. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy a few of them, but the ones that people have the hardest times with are the ones that trade spectacle for character development instead of going into that deeper character development. we're just getting all the action and explosions and everything else. And while that, yes, exists in the Marvel movies, you definitely get the character development, you get the quieter scenes, and you get that. And that's something that the comic books have done as well. And that's what I think, in turn, I know that Tarantino is a comic book fan. I know that, that influenced him in ways as well, that, he enjoyed that connected universe. That's why he likes to connect his characters. And that goes into, and I mentioned it a couple of times in a couple of the other Tarantino episodes. It's something that I enjoy as a fan, because I grew up on the Marvel comic books, and the types of entertainment that attract me the most, such as Marvel, Quentin Tarantino, Stephen King, Kevin Smith movies, is that interconnectedness, that knowing that characters that are in one movie could be connected to another, or could potentially show up in another movie or book or story or whatever. And for me, that and that rewards the people who are paying attention, who come back every time. And I think that's what will always keep me attracted to Marvel and the MCU and Quentin Tarantino is, like you mentioned earlier, is that, these characters are connected in ways. Donnie Donowitz, as much as I don't like Eli Roth's portrayal of him, he is connected to Lee Donowitz, which is the movie producer in the movie True Romance. And so again, another movie connection in terms of filmmaking. We get this character who his grandson, I think, becomes a movie producer. And so it's these interesting little, this through line through his movies itself, that he's been trying to talk about his passion for film leading up to this fairy tale of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And getting to that point of showing us exactly how he feels about film in general. And I think that's fascinating.
No, I agree. And as you said about those sort of the connective tissue that that joins his movies and that runs through. I think the wonderful thing about the way Tarantino does it is you really don't need to know. It's like you really could. You could go through that entire film. In fact, you could go through his entire back catalogue and not really pick up any of those connections, and it doesn't lessen the experience of those movies, and they still are perfectly brilliant on their own. But if you do pick them up, it gives you a little thrill. It's like, oh wow, that's really cool. It's a nice nod that he doesn't need to do that. He doesn't need to make the effort to thread those things through. But again, a filmmaker who's as meticulous as he is, it's wonderful when you spend enough time with his work and you see how it all goes together. You mentioned Stephen King, and when you're chatting there, and I agree. Yes. That's why I love Stephen King. He's my favorite writer, and it's the same thing. It's the Marvel thing from my childhood. It's like just like a throwaway line in a book that connects to a book that you read maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it gives you a little thrill. And it's, oh wow, he's made the effort to kind of join that up. But again, if you hadn't read that book where he mentions the character, it's fine. It still works perfectly well within the context of the story that he's telling you. I love stuff like that, man. Honestly, I could fill like a 6-hour podcast talking about my joys of the connected universes, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, and that was something that was kind of cool about it too, was that Tarantino directed Jackie Brown, which is based on an Elmore Leonard novel called Rum Punch, which Elmore Leonard does the exact same stuff. He has characters that the characters of Ordell Robbie and now I'm blanking on his name, Louis Gara. Both of those characters are in another earlier book and committing a different crime. And so it's fascinating for all of these things that I've myself have enjoyed is that interconnected universe. I love that kind of stuff, because it's just so, like you said, it's, if you don't catch it, if you're not reading it, you can enjoy the stories just as much. But when you do catch the little things, and a lot of times it is little things, it's little character a side character that may have been more important in another book, and you're just like, oh my god, I know that character. And with Tarantino, it's largely just family names, mostly. Like that's the kind of thing that you get these connected through family names,
Yeah.
little bits here and there. And I love that because it just creates this bigger, more fun universe that it doesn't, it never takes away from it. It just adds deeper uh, story and complexity to these movies that are just fantastic. It's just it just agree. Makes it just that much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's like I said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, having revisited it, remains firmly ensconced as my favorite. It's a comfort movie, a proper comfort movie for me.
Yeah.
And as I say, I could spend hours and hours with those characters, just watching them going about their day and interacting with each other. I don't need anything else, because I find the world that they inhabit so richly portrayed on screen. You feel like you're there. You feel like you're walking down the streets with them and traveling with them. It's this wonderful dreamland that obviously Tarantino has come from, and it's lost to the mists of time. It will never be able to get back there again. And as I said, ending on that note of Sharon Tate and Rick Dalton finally meeting each other, and it's so bittersweet, and it's a lovely take. And also, this is something I only sourced or discovered after I'd seen it the first time, that because these are real events and they're not so long ago that there aren't living people involved who aren't still around. It was nice to see that he'd reached out to the family of Sharon Tate before the film.
Yes,
and he'd spoken to her sister, and he kind of got her blessing. I read that she was unconvinced to begin with and thought it was a terrible idea until he personally got in touch with her and spent a lot of time trying to explain what he was doing. And I think she was quite touched by the film and what it was trying, because obviously, as I said earlier, Sharon Tate has become this sort of like this figure for like the end of old Hollywood when she was murdered. Right. And it's lovely, I think, that her family gets a little bit of pleasure is the wrong word. It must be sad and heartbreaking, but it must also be lovely to see the legacy that Tarantino is trying to protect for her, or is trying to project even, that what would have happened had that awful event not occurred. So yeah, no, like I said, I adore the bones of that film.
Yeah, no, it's a great film. It's not, I wouldn't say it's my favorite. My favorite is Django Unchained. I don't know why, but that movie just gets me.
Django's terrific.
So
yeah,
I love Django. But I do enjoy it. Like, I came out of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I saw it at the theater, and I came out of it enjoying it. But I didn't know exactly how I felt about it the first time, other than that I enjoyed it. But having seen it a couple of times since, I find it to be a very good movie that tells, and like we said, it takes out a lot of you're not getting a lot of the violence that you associate with his movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more of a kind of a slice of life in a way. For all the characters. You're just hanging out with them. You're getting, Rick Dalton's the main character, and you're getting his kind of story of, what he's going to do with his life post stardom, and how he's going to continue to be an actor. Is he going to, what is he going to do with his life at this point? And, that part is fun, because and that's part of also the part of the transition of Hollywood as well, because you're taking a guy, an actor who, was famous for a part, and then he's transitioning to this now kind of, almost in a way, he's transitioning out of the public eye in a way, for the next breed of actors. And so it's kind of funny to see that, and see that, and Sharon Tate, on the other hand, is part of that new wave of actors. She's coming up at that time, and so getting to see them kind of connect at the end is, yeah, it's both heartbreaking and uplifting at the same time. And it's just, and it's like a what could have been. It's an interesting, like, what if that, what if they could have been in a movie together? What if, things were different? And it's yeah, it's very interesting. It's hard for me to, like, really, like, I enjoy the movie a lot, but I don't know completely how I feel about it.
What I would say is, I mean, I fully accept that that it's not going to be many people's absolute favorite Tarantino. I totally get that. For me, though, it's more of a, if I'm honest with you, Robert, it's more of a gut reaction. But as I said, I came out of that film and I could just feel it in my bones. I just knew that I came out and I was like, that was terrific. And look, the person I was with wasn't that one over. And many of my friends as well, who I've discussed this film at length with many of my friends, can't quite see what I see in it. But all I can do is kind of justify my point and kind of fight my corner, because I get so much pleasure, like I said, just out of spending time in that world and spending time with those characters. I think it's the best that Brad Pitt has been in many years. I mean, he's terrific, absolutely terrific in Inglourious Basterds, but it's a very different kind of terrific. He's given a very over the top, caricatured performance in that, which is brilliant. But there's a layer to the Cliff performance that absolutely sings for me, absolutely sings. And I love every choice he makes in that film. I love everything about the way in which his story arc develops. And I love it to bits. And especially when you compare it to something like Inglourious Basterds, which, if I'm honest, the first time I watched it, I thought it was good but not great, and that's kind of as much as I would give it. It's like, well, it's fine, it's good at what it's doing, but it's not perfect, and that's fine. And as I said, some of my biggest issues with it were the idea of how segmented it felt, and how it felt almost like, as I said earlier, that it's not as good as the sum of its parts. There are individual moments that are brilliant, but it doesn't work all the way
inconsistent tone. There
are just things about it that didn't work for me. And as I said, I genuinely did feel a bit uncomfortable about some of the stuff, especially as we discussed the scene with Bridget von Hammersmark. I found it genuinely distasteful. It's a bit too much. I've softened a lot on it as I've gone on, and as I said, having revisited it a few times now, I find I enjoy it more each time that I go back to it. And what I enjoyed about it most this time was using it as a sort of comparator for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and kind of digging into those similarities and the things that that kind of tie both films together. So I mean, for me, Inglourious would probably, I don't know if it'd be in my top 5, like sort of Tarantino. I don't actually. I need to sit and do a ranking, which that sounds quite intimidating, to be honest. But I think it's a terrific piece of work. I just think because I'm so, I would almost go so far as to say, almost kind of blinded by my love for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I find it hard to take on some of the criticisms. I understand some of the criticism. I understand where people are coming from, and I understand it's not going to work for everybody. But I can only speak for kind of how I feel about it. And it was a film that first time round, it just clicked with me, and I knew it was going to be like one of my films that I'd go back to.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that DiCaprio is putting in one of his career best performances in this. It's like, he's done a lot of great performances for a lot of great directors, and I think that this pairing, I honestly think that DiCaprio and Tarantino is a better pairing than even DiCaprio and Scorsese is.
Yes,
because I think that Tarantino brings something out in DiCaprio that even DiCaprio notices, that just makes him that much better of an actor. I think that Scorsese brings out the star in DiCaprio, but Tarantino brings out the better actor.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. It's funny actually because we've talked at length about these films. I don't really feel like I've said much about about DiCaprio's performance, but yeah, no, I agree. I think he's absolutely magnificent in it, and he shows a real sort of there's a real sweetness to the role of Rick Dalton.
That a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah, that I didn't expect before I saw the film. I didn't think I was going that was the character we were going to be getting, but I find him sad. I find him quite like I find him quite likable. I think he's quite he's a very likable person. And like watching him sort of like try desperately to put a career together after after age comes for him, and he sees himself as something of sort of a washed up celebrity at the outset of the film. As I said, I love the fact that in the midst of all that, he's still got his best mate there who's behind him 100% no matter what. Yeah. I mean, there's that lovely bit where he drops him off at the at the start of the day for when he's filming, and he just kind of says to him, "Remember, you're Rick fucking Dalton," and it's like, yeah. I mean, I'm almost like pumping my fist in there with him, like, yeah, he is Rick Dalton. So yeah, I think DiCaprio's terrific in it, and if I'm honest, I don't think Pitt's performance would work as well without that performance to bounce off of. I mean, I think there's a wee bit of alchemy going on between the two of them. It's sort of lightning.
And they actually said afterward that that they would work together. They would love to work together in another movie. And so, they had such a good time working together that they want to do it again. So
I'll be there on opening night for that one when it comes.
Right. Especially if it's a Tarantino movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A Tarantino horror movie starring Brad Pitt and Leonardo
DiCaprio. There you go.
Sign me up.
Right. Definitely 100%. All right. Do we have anything else you haven't been able to mention yet that you would like to talk about?
I think I've kind of exhausted pretty much everything I wanted to bring up. It's been a lot of fun. It's been great. I mean, as I said, when I started watching both these films, I really didn't think about them as of a piece, and it's fascinating to see how much of a piece they are. And it's now got me thinking about, like, I mean, I know you've doubled up other films for the series, and like I said, I'm very excited to listen to the pod and hear them. But it also makes me think, like, what would happen if you match this up with like something like Pulp Fiction? How do they look together? And what crossover do we see there? So yeah, I'm excited to hear what everyone else makes of the other movies and to see where the lines are. That'd be really cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely been a couple of instances where I paired up. Mostly I tried to pair them up because of various connections as they were, like obviously the Kill Bill movies together, and I did the Grindhouse movies together. But I had From Dusk Till Dawn and Jackie Brown together, and obviously an odd pairing, but there was some good discussion about how there is a similarity in a way. So that definitely was a fun discussion.
That's a good tease. I'm excited to hear what they are. Again, like I've been out of the loop on Tarantino movies for a while in terms of going back to the older ones. Like the last one I watched was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's been a while since I've kind of revisited them. And just this discussion tonight, having revisited those films as well, really sparked it for me. I think I'm definitely going to dig out my Blu-rays and go on a little bit of a Tarantino marathon.
Yeah, definitely. You'll have to let me know what else you might find in those.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, you can this is the part of the podcast where I have my guests say where they can be found on the internet and plug anything they want to do. So
I am a notorious plugger, so thanks very much for the opportunity. If anyone wants to hear more from me or catch up with what I'm doing, the best place to find me is over on Twitter. I'm at Angry Scotsman 81. My timeline tends to be just full of horror bits and bobs. I work for the London Horror Society, So I do a lot of film reviews, TV reviews, interviews. So yeah, you can find anything from me pretty much over there. In terms of my creative writing, again, there'll be links on my page there to like, my most recent stuff. I think the most recent one, I think I had a short story in the Bloody Good Horror anthology from Hellbound Books. That came out a couple of months ago. And the life of any writer does, they'll tell you, I've got like 5 or 6 stories that have been accepted for publication, but desperately waiting to find out when they're actually going to be published. So keep an eye on my Twitter for that. And the last thing I'd like to plug, if you don't mind, I mentioned it earlier in the show, myself and Dan Owen are about to launch a podcast called Vampire Videos. And what we're doing there is we're going to be looking at vampire films over the last 100 years, TV shows as well. We've got some excellent films in the first batch. We're looking at 30 Days of Night, Nosferatu, Vampire in Brooklyn, which provided some of the funniest podcasting I've done in a long time. Unintentional, I think, but it was there. So yeah, check that out. We've got a lot of really cool guests coming on. We've got Danish guy Esterhazy is going to be on at some point as well, talking about I think The Hunger she's coming on for. We've got lots of really cool guests coming up. So you can follow us on Twitter at Vamp Videos, and we'll keep you updated with what's happening there. We're looking to launch in August, so keep a wee eye out for that. I think you'll like what we've got planned.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, definitely. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah. And if you need another guest, just let me know.
we are always on the lookout for guests, man. So I'll definitely be in touch, and we'll look at what your favorite vampire films are, and we'll try and get you on for
definitely.
Something. Excellent.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on, and I had a great time, and hopefully I can get you on for another episode in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. A real blast. It was excellent. As I said, these are 2 films that I've a lot of thoughts on, as I'm sure people know here. I've got a lot to say about them. But yeah, honestly, anytime at all, I'll be happy to come back, and it's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thank you.
Cheers, man.
Thanks again to Hugh for coming on the show. Next episode, Preston Fossil returns to the show, and we close out the series with a talk about Tarantino's influences. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.